So once again, my name is Shari Dunn, and thanks for joining me. As you know, I've been doing these deeper dive conversations, and this is my second conversation. And I'm so excited to have with me today Jeanice Chieng, who's a member of the Hmong community here in Portland, Oregon. Jeanice, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Shari. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, Jeanice, it's so interesting. When I reached out to you, one of the questions you said, you asked, we have a common friend, was like, so now what did you know about Hmong community? And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you is because I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which has a large Hmong Lao community, right? And as a person who does diversity, equity, inclusion work, which is what I do, we frequently talk about the Asian American experience and we tend to collapse it, right? Right now, when we talk about Asian Americans in the United States, we mean a large group of people from South Asian to Chinese, Japanese, Hmong. We're talking about a lot of different people. And I relayed the story to you of doing a training with a man who was Chinese who was new to the U.S. and I did this diversity training. He says, "Well, I guess I'm Asian. I don't know," because his identity was he's Chinese and it's not the same as being Japanese, so he wasn't clear how he was in this group. And one of the reasons I wanted to highlight the Hmong community in particular is because when we talk about Asianness, the Hmong community tends to get washed away in the kind of model minority myth about Asians. There isn't a disaggregation of the data to really get down to the fact that the Hmong community has different issues than we think of as the community, Asian community broadly. So first of all, for those who don't know, I would love if you could give us just a little background on, what do we mean by Hmong or Laos or that type of thing?
Absolutely. I'll start with that, which is Hmong people are a small ethnic group originally from China, southern China, and for centuries really had a lot of conflict with the Chinese government. And around the turn of around the 1800s, many started migrating to Southeast Asia, to Laos, Vietnam, and mostly into the highlands of those countries to really kind of seek refuge and be able to live pretty much in a way in which they can, self-determine how they wanted to live, right? Mm-hmm. And it was during the Vietnam War that Hmong people were recruited by the CIA into what is called a secret war, where they really allied and supported the U.S. military and the government in Laos during the Vietnam War. And so after the end of the Vietnam War, Hmong people were really left
Right.
and abandoned by the U.S. government, right? Even after all of their efforts, saving U.S. soldiers and fighting alongside the U.S. during the Vietnam War. And so, that was around 1975 with the fall of Saigon, right?
Yeah, that most people are familiar with from History Channel or that type of thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so people, during that time, the borders were open. And so my parents, along with many other Hmong people, actually left Laos, obviously, because they were marked for genocide, for having been helping the Americans and perpetrators, basically. And, my parents were lucky enough to seek refuge into refugee camps in Thailand and then came here in 1978. And that's how we ended up here in Portland,
Right.
Oregon. And that's a little bit kind of just a short history of Hmong people.
Yeah, no, that's excellent history. That's really good history. It's very, very well done. And, there was a large population that has settled in the Midwest, and a lot of people don't know that, right?
For a long time, even as a young person, I didn't even know that.
Right.
I thought that most Hmong people were in Oregon or in
Right.
in California, right?
Right.
But there is a large population in Minnesota and in Wisconsin. That's why, when our mutual friend said, Shari wants to talk to you about Hmong people and Lao people, and I was like, really? How does she know? Because completely, to be honest, I mean, as you know, born and raised here in Portland, I got questions all the time. What are you? Where are you from? Where are you really from? And when I would say I'm Hmong, my parents are from Laos. You know, what is Hmong? In Mongolia? Like, I just, you know, it was, the questions kept going and going because they had no context or understanding of
where you
actually
originate.
Our history, right? Our you know, our interlocking history with the U.S. during the Vietnam War, how we and why we came here, right? And so,
one of the interesting things for me about all of this is that, first of all, as I said at the top, we tend to ignore the complexity of Asian community, right? We just call everybody Asian and call it a day. But by doing that and not disaggregating the data, we are doing a disservice to Hmong community and particularly youth, because those type of, quote, model minority statistics are not applying to Hmong youth, correct?
Correct, absolutely. There's so much harm when we clump everybody into this, you know, Asian kind of umbrella. And when you look at the data and the income, you know, or educational attainment of different ethnicities under this Asian umbrella, they vary so much. And, you know, for Hmong folks, you know, roughly 60% graduate high school, right? I think we have about 19% actually with a college bachelor's degree, right? A lot lower than, I think the national average is 33%. And so, you know, when we operate under this idea that all Asians are this model minority, hardworking, smart, you know, puts their heads down and get things done, and, you know, really great at math and doing well, we're really doing a huge disservice and causing a lot of harm to not just Asians and different groups like the, you know, Hmong and Lao and Mian communities, but to everyone, you know.
Because it's actually putting people in a box, right? That isn't the box they want to be in. I know I had a woman who I was working with who is Chinese American, I believe, and she was saying how she would get comments because she wasn't that, right? Because she was more in a creative area, she was doing something different, and then people. So this model minority myth has, and for those who don't know, the model minority myth, I guess we should talk about. The model minority myth is a myth that presents Asian Americans, first of all, as a monolith, no diversity. Second of all, as compliant, especially to systemic racism. They don't care about racism. They're just happy to be here. They're all good at math. They're easy to dominate.
Absolutely.
You know, that type of thing. And that is, on the one hand, it's what we would call a backhanded compliment, because it's not a compliment. It's really stereotyping that still has negative impact, right? Because what if you're not an engineer? What if you're not Chinese or Japanese? What if you're not this type of person, right?
Absolutely.
And so the model minority myth is something that has also been used to pit communities against each other, right? To pit, in particular, Asian and Black communities against each other.
Absolutely.
To say, hey, this group of people, they don't mind what we say and do. They just go along to get along. Why can't you be like that? But that's not true.
Right. It's a complete fabrication, right? This model minority term that came out in the late 60s during the civil rights movement, just for that fact, is to use Asians, you know, as a wedge to pit us, as you said, with Black communities, and to really say there's no racism, you know, they did it, you know, why can't you, right? And so that's the way that it's been used, and really, you know, it's damaging to everybody, because we're not really able to tell our full stories as, you know, my story or others in my community, right? Our full stories of how we've been actually racialized, and how our experience has been, because we didn't grow up. I know I didn't grow up with parents who had education or had wealth or money or any of those types of things, right? We grew up, you know, here in North and Northeast Portland in poverty, right? Really struggling, not having an idea of where to go, really, you know, just kind of in the dark. especially as my parents were refugees, dealing with PTSD and all of the trauma from war, you know. And so I would say for second generations, you know, Hmong folks, at least for myself, I know I just really struggled, and a lot of things were uncharted waters, and I had to really find my way, right, with the little resources and information that I had.
Well, and that's exactly why it's important to disaggregate the data.
Yes.
Because we need targeted solutions, right, for different people. I mean, if we're going to do diversity, equity, inclusion in our workplaces or in our schools or things of this nature, then we have to look deeper in the data, particularly when we talk about, I know in Wisconsin, the same issues around graduation. High school graduation numbers are lower, college numbers are lower, poverty is higher, gang affiliation is higher. If we ignore that, then we can't have intentional solutions to help that community, right?
Absolutely. And there are Hmong students. I recently just read an article about a PhD student in the Midwest in neuroscience, you know, applying for a particular scholarship or fellowship, you know. And the fellowship turned her down and said she wasn't underrepresented, you know, and she, you know, rightfully said, I'm Hmong.
Right.
Name me one other neuroscience PhD student, right?
Well, that's because it's Asian. That's the problem again, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous to really just, you know, Asia comprises so many countries and languages. And so when you're aggregating all of that data and saying, you know, no, they're all doing well in education and, you know, all earning more than the national average. I mean, again, you're doing a huge disservice and causing a lot of harm.
Yeah, people in their homes are looking around like, who in my house is doing that? Where's that in my house?
Exactly,
right.
Exactly.
And you have seen a lot of gains in the Hmong community, and I can speak primarily to the Midwest, but you see Hmong judges, Hmong lawyers, Hmong people really stepping into civic life in the Midwest, who are probably second and maybe even third generation at this point, folks. And so that goes a long way. But I mean, what can we say to those who are watching, or to employers or maybe educators, that they should think about when they talk about supporting communities of color and being aware of Hmong communities and finding out where is Hmong community? Because, you know, people on LinkedIn, I don't know where they all will be. They're not all in Oregon, but how do people find out about these communities?
Yeah, that's a really great question, right? And really, I just generally tell folks, you know, get to know people, you know, get out of your comfort zone, you know. I remember several times when people would say, I've never met a Hmong person before, you know, and there's actually a community here, you know, in Portland, right? There's actually a few businesses here. And so for me, it's really, you know, get out, get to know folks, and do your homework, right? And educate yourself. And that's why it's so important that we are actually informing and educating our youth in particular, right, about our history, and not overshadowing and, you know, not including, you know, Black history, Asian American history, and Latinx histories. I mean, we're just not weaving those things into education. And so there's just so many different ways to approach that, I guess, is what I'm saying, in terms of trying to understand who is in our community, right?
And who's in your community where you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, this point about history is a really important one, because right now we're apparently in the history wars portion of our country, which is not the first time actually, but probably like the second or third time, where we really are in a battle for who controls history. And there's this fear about the truth. That somehow the truth is going to destroy the country or something.
Right.
But telling the truth about the Vietnam War and understanding the distinction that Hmong people have made, and distinguishing and not being so lazy as to call everybody Asian, but taking the time to distinguish, that enriches us. I don't think it minimizes us.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? But there seems to be this like hysteria that if we tell the truth about history, everybody's going to implode, or I don't know.
Absolutely. I don't understand it either, right? And so I'm with you. And I think for me as a young person, you know, not having accurate history and not understanding, you know, my parents' journey, my people's journey to this country, having, you know, those missing pages, right, in my history book, along with these stereotypes of the model minority or the, you know, perpetual foreigner, right? That was really damaging to me, you know, and it created for me a level of internalized oppression, right? And so absolutely, I think we need to really be able to tell the truth about all of our histories, and we're all intertwined and interdependent, you know? So.
Yeah. We could take 2 lessons from COVID, and one of them is that we're all intertwined and interdependent, you know, around the globe, as opposed to fighting about masks. I mean, you know what I mean? There's like another lesson we could take from COVID, but yeah, I mean, you know, and this goes to the issue of how COVID and other issues were formed around anti-Asian sentiment. And again, this kind of full wash of all people, right? And this recognition that it's that Asian Americans, if we use this term, are not interested in being a model minority and being yelled at or harassed or beat on the street, and they will say something. You know what I mean? Like, there's some kind of shift here about this.
Absolutely. And I think even before the anti-Asian kind of hate and bias crimes, you know, before all of that happened in COVID, I think there was still, you know, or maybe even during, I think there was still kind of some surprise as what, Asians experience racism? You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's what the model minority myth does, is that it just overshadows all of our struggles and all of our history with regard to exclusion, racism, exploitation, right? And so I totally agree in terms of, you know, accurate information in history about you know, our stories.
Yeah, it's our stories as a collective. You know, I had talked to a lot of different folks about this, and I think about young people are with the non-binary, right? Then they bring that energy, which I think is great. And I've often thought about this. The United States is a they. You know, we're a we and a they.
Yeah.
We're not a she or he. We're a we and a they, right? We are multiple identities. And we need to think about ourselves as multiple identities, but we're having such a hard time, like this struggle to be just one identity,
Absolutely.
Which is kind of a specific white normative identity. It doesn't mean you lose. It just, to me, it looks like an enhancement.
Absolutely. It's completely an enhancement. I think so too. That's what makes us, I think, special in some ways, right? Having, you know, so many different cultures, so many different ethnicities, food, languages, all of that truly is our strength, you know, as a country. But I hear you. There's this binary thinking and wanting to put everything into a box or fit everything into the box, you know.
Has to fit neatly.
Yes.
Everybody from, you know, South Asians, from, you know, India to Hmong people are Asian.
Absolutely.
And it's like, wow, that is a real swath of humanity.
Absolutely.
You know, there. You mentioned something too as we kind of wrap up. You mentioned this idea of internalized oppression and perpetual foreignness. And this is something that is interesting, because I would tell you that Black people also have that foreignness, but it's different. It's as if you don't exist in time and space. In other words, I've had people say, oh, well, even being from Wisconsin, which Milwaukee now is like probably 30% Black at this point. But when I was younger, people were like, oh, you're where, you know, it's as if you don't belong.
Absolutely.
Right? And so that foreignness is not a concept I'm unfamiliar with, right? There's somehow like you're trapped, you're not in time or space or something. But I think with Asian Americans, it's very pronounced, because people are clearly going on a visual clue.
Absolutely.
And based on their visual clue, they're deciding you're not from here. right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's absolutely that. That's what I see it as, at least, and how I've experienced it too. Because we look, like we're from Asia, right? That we are always a foreigner. And my own experience too, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, Shari, but in the ways in which race was brought up as a young person, we always talked about it as a black or white issue.
Right.
Right. And so, it was always a black or white issue. When we learned about slavery, not a ton, but we did learn about it, right? And everything was presented as a black and white issue. And so I think for me, as an Asian, Hmong person, like, where do I fit in, right? And I would say there was never any mention of any Asian American history, right, in the history books that I read. And so there was constantly this kind of erasure of our contributions to this country. And so it does feel different. Absolutely.
Yeah, and experience. I mean, because Asian Americans helped settle the West.
Absolutely.
Asian Americans have been in the United States since the United States has been here. But you're led to believe that you're just arrived every time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
and that can lead to, just to your point, the internalization of oppression, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I imagine, I don't know, and I don't want to speak for everybody else, right? And that's also like a fallacy and misguided belief that, I'm speaking for all of Hmong people or all of Asian people, right? I'm not. I'm just talking about my own personal experience here. But absolutely, for me, it was just confusing to grow up as a young person, right? With all of these kind of stereotypes and then no accurate information. And parents who, really experienced so much trauma that they couldn't tell me, right? So.
And that immigrant experience layered on top of it. Yeah, I mean, I think this question about belonging is where we are in our country, like who gets to belong and whose story gets to be told. And as been oft said, everyone is from somewhere else except Native folks on whose land we sit, right?
Right.
And so we all should have equal claim to be able to bring our full selves to this space. What's been interesting to me over the last couple of years is the beginning of dialogue. That I personally feel that in my lifetime, I've never seen more cross-racial dialogue, cross-racial alliance. As people of color, and I know some people feel some kind of way about that term, they feel it is an erasure. It puts all of these broad people with all these different backgrounds into this one pot, right?
Yeah.
And I know Black people are very sensitive to that because there is this consistent feeling that we'll get pushed again away to the side. That being said, I feel that this ability to start having conversations about the ways in which oppression has shown up similarly, differently, and similarly is really constructive.
Right.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I haven't seen this energy in I don't think, in a long time.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I appreciate the conversations, especially with COVID, the pandemic and the, murder of George Floyd, right? And the uprisings and the movement for Black lives. I think that sparked a lot of really important conversations. And, to me, that's really the first step, right? There's so much more digging that we all individually have to do on an individual level, right? And that's, whether whether I'm Hmong or whether you're white or whether, whatever, ethnic or racial background you are. Because we've all been socialized under these lies, and we've all been socialized and pit against each other and really isolated and separated for too long. And so the conversations really energize me, and that, we can start digging deeper beyond stereotypes and really be able to have important conversations and form relationships and then change these structures and these systems and institutions that are really, I think, damaging all of us,
Well, I think that's an amazing point to end on. I think it's a great summation. And Jeanice, thank you so much for your time and for just sharing yourself and your community. And just, like you said, we can only be a voice for us.
Absolutely.
But I really appreciate it because I there's something just always been in me. Like, I want to elevate this conversation, and I really appreciate you being a part of that.
Yes, thank you for having me, Shari. It's really, really good to just have this conversation as well, because it's really important for me too. So thank you.
Thanks. And thanks for checking us out.